Good morning and welcome to the Point. It has been a very busy week, very active presidential political cycle with some high-profile visits here to Michigan over the Labor Day weekend and a surprise visit by Donald Trump to Mexico, and then a big immigration speech. But before any of that happened, we sat down with the chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party to talk to him about the state of the race and the state of unity within his party. The last time we had a chance to talk, and not even in depth, because you were a pretty busy guy in Philadelphia.
It was a pretty busy time.
But we were actually staying up around Valley Forge. You were staying up in that area because that's where the delegation was. And I think for people who don't know, it's kind of an interesting concept because obviously everything was at the Wells Fargo Center.
That's correct.
But the delegations are spread out all over the greater Philadelphia area, and a lot of the activity takes place in those delegate hotels. I think Minnesota was also
Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the convention. What was your takeaway going in knowing that obviously Senator Sanders had an impact, Secretary Clinton, it was her show largely. So what was your takeaway?
It was a lot of work. It was actually my first convention. I've never been to a convention as a delegate, so the first experience of having to actually be in charge of our delegation and make sure that everything was on time and went smoothly was tough enough. But it was actually an incredible experience. I mean, despite the lack of sleep and all the things that you have to deal with on the fly, it was a pretty remarkable convention. I think it went off without much of a hitch. I think the reports of the messaging, the speakers, and the fact that Democrats were really coming together at that point and have come together much more even since. I think it was a real opportunity to show the differences between the two parties, and I think the conventions really kind of showed that in sharp relief. Not only the quality of the actual production of the convention, but the speakers and the message. But it's you get to meet people from all over your state, all over your country. There's people with we are a big tent party in the real sense that you had people there who have varying views on a lot of different issues, but ultimately I think it was this kickoff to what we anticipate to be a very successful November.
It's interesting when you think about the logistics, and when you say it's your first convention, I was just thinking, well, that's a big undertaking, because while you have these people staying 40 miles or 35 miles away from the convention center, you have to make sure that they get transportation at the right time. And it's probably even more difficult making sure you get them from the convention center back out to the hotel. But there are other places to go. There are events that are going on. But just the delegate get-togethers in the morning, and keeping in mind, again for our viewers, those things start at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And you don't get out of the convention until well after 11 o'clock at night. So that's when you talk about the lack of sleep. And there are receptions after that. So it's a very busy week. And there was 2 weeks back to back. I mean, there were a lot of politics in that 2 weeks. But talk about your delegation, because not only did you have all of the Michigan folks, Democrats that were represented there, Senator Sanders showed up on Thursday morning. Walter Mondale was speaking, I think, that same morning. I mean, you had a good line of folks that were coming through. What does that do for a delegation, particularly when Senator Sanders came in, because the nomination had already been given to Clinton by acclamation at his urging, but there were still some very passionate Sanders supporters.
Absolutely, and I look at that as a real positive, frankly. I mean, people getting involved. A lot of people have gotten involved in the political process for the first time. They really latched on to the message that Senator Sanders delivered, and frankly, the convention, I think, showed the impact that he had with the adoption of the platform and many of the issues that continue to be championed by Secretary Clinton. But we thought it was important, specifically Michigan, Minnesota. We were together, two states that Senator Sanders both carried, to make sure that we had people coming in to talk about what's at stake, why we need to be together, why Secretary Clinton, it is imperative that she get elected, and make sure that Donald Trump doesn't get anywhere near the White House. But it was exciting because people who had worked hard for Senator Sanders and were there at the delegation may not have ever had a chance to meet him. They got a chance to hear him in person, hear what he had to say, and I think that was a really great way to end our time at the convention and send people back home to their districts and their counties and get fired up to work for not just the presidential candidate, but we stress this. This is an important election for the state house, for the Board of Education, for township and local races as well.
When you talk about bringing people together in that big tent, the idea that there are so many diverse ideas and positions that all more or less are working towards the same outcome, and they may have different ways of getting there. As a party chairman, it seems to me it's a little bit like being Speaker of the House over in Lansing, which was once described to me as herding minnows. Keeping everybody kind of going in the same direction has got to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, well, it is. It's not the easiest thing to do sometimes, especially right after a very competitive primary. But I think the key is, first of all, listening, respecting people that have differing views, allowing them the opportunity to talk about why they may feel a different way on a specific issue or have some issues with the candidate, educating them about the process and how we have rules and systems that we do follow to ensure that these elections and decisions are made as fairly as possible. I think that's the key, and that's what we've tried to do here in Michigan, is really set the example that the party is an opportunity for everybody to come in. We don't demand that people have 100% strict adherence to a specific candidate or philosophy, but just that they share a core set of progressive values. And within that, I think having small intra-party disputes are healthy for moving the party forward. And the chairman's job and a lot of elected officials is to really take that in, take it seriously, and then make sure that we try to make those concerns incorporated into our platform or into our candidate's message.
And when you talk about taking seriously, obviously both tickets are taking Michigan pretty seriously. We have seen a flurry of activity since those conventions. And again, I will explain this as we get into this show, but one of the reasons we're talking about the convention, we had 3 weeks of Olympics between conventions and now, and this is really our first chance to kind of do the recap. But in that period of time, Senator Kaine was here on the Friday after the Republican convention. Mike Pence was here the week before during the Democratic convention. Secretary Clinton and Mr. Trump were both here the following week, and candidate Trump has been back yet again. Give me your take on Michigan. We know since 1988 Republicans have not been able to win in a presidential election cycle, yet both camps seem to be looking at Michigan like it's a battleground, even though the numbers would suggest right now, and again, we're taping this a little in advance and they can vary, but certainly the trajectory has been for Clinton in the state.
Well, we've said all along, we think that the message that Secretary Clinton has about making sure that we are rebuilding our economy and doing it in a way that brings people together to solve problems is a message that is going to resonate with Michigan voters. People are concerned about manufacturing jobs, actually having a plan, a specific plan on how to deal with that, as opposed to just sloganeering, as we've seen with Donald Trump. But people in Michigan, I think, understand, Democrats especially, that you cannot take this state for granted. We have not been successful in non-presidential years, and that makes it even more important to ensure that we win this year and take advantage of what we know will be an increased Democratic turnout. But it's also important to make sure that you have people on the ground communicating the message, talking to voters, making sure that they understand where they have to vote, what's at stake on the ticket. Taking it for granted is not an option. We know that Secretary Clinton understands that no Democrat can get to the White House without winning the state of Michigan. So we want to make sure that that happens. We feel good about where we are right now at this point, but things have changed. The news cycle, as we were talking about, changes very fast, and having that infrastructure in place to deal with things as they ebb and flow is critical to winning Michigan.
That's interesting because I know you're obviously younger than I, but you've been around this a long while. You've had a keen interest in politics, and you have watched this closely. And I thought that was very interesting that you made that point, because we're seeing things go by in this election cycle because the news moves so rapidly. There are things that could be critically damaging to campaigns even 4 years ago, and certainly 15 or 16 years ago. But now the cycle seems to move so quickly that something barely lands before something else comes up, and this is quickly forgotten, and our attention span is so short. On one hand, that might make it easier to deflect bad news, but is it harder to get your message out in a cycle?
I think it is. I think it takes a disciplined approach, especially at the presidential level, and that's that is. I think arguably there is no argument about which candidate is more disciplined. Donald Trump has made his campaign all about kind of his impulsive speaking from the cuff behavior, and what Secretary Clinton and I think the Democrats in general are trying to do is, despite the news cycle, to have a clear, consistent message about being stronger together, making sure that we're investing in people, giving tax cuts to small businesses while making sure that people at the top pay their fair share. All the other noise and issues that come and go have an impact. But if you have a clear plan and you're disciplined about your message, that usually is what makes a campaign successful. Controlling the things that you can control, which is having a strong operation, a strong organization, continuing to deliver your message in a way that people actually can hear.
Last week on this show, Senator Stabenow, when asked about the strange relationship of these candidates, both have negatives above 50%, which is, to me, still a bit of a mystery how that happens. And Senator Stabenow was talking about Secretary Clinton and her 30 years experience, and Donald Trump and his negatives above 50%. Without trying to get into explaining how all of that works, is this both one of the most critical and unusual presidential cycles you've ever seen?
Yes, to both. I think it's critical in the sense that I don't think we have a choice so much as between two different parties in this sense in the election. You have a choice, frankly, between two different views of democracy, with Donald Trump kind of presenting himself as a strong man who can fix everything on his own and regulations be out the window and the rules don't necessarily apply, and Secretary Clinton, who, despite criticisms and flaws, I don't think there's any question she is committed to a system of government where people have the ultimate say. So I think in that sense it's very critical for where this country goes in the future, but certainly unusual. I think in the modern media cycle too, you're going to see more and more of this going forward, where candidates who, they may be popular before they get into the ring, but the constant attention and different news sources that sometimes can't be verified but are able to slip into mainstream news outlets makes it tougher and tougher to remain as favorable as candidates may have in the past, but certainly a strange election.
As I say, we talked with Mr. Dillon before Donald Trump's trip to Mexico, his immigration speech, and all the Labor Day activity that's going on. But this presidential race continues to be an unusual one, to be sure. We'll hear more about that from Attorney General Bill Schuette when we come back to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. Before all of the activities of this past week, we sat down with Michigan's Attorney General, Republican Bill Schuette, to talk to him about the state of the presidential race. It's been over a month, but we've been off the air because of the Olympics, and I know you and I chatted a lot during the convention in Cleveland. Give me your take of what it was like, because this wasn't your first rodeo. You've been to these before. Although I'm going to put words in your mouth, and you may throw them out.
So what's new? What's new on To The Point?
This must have been a little different than most.
Well, actually, there was less drama than I might have anticipated, and that's because Hillary Clinton is the great unifier. And everyone might have had their candidate, and there were 17 Republican nominees seeking the nomination to run as president, and Donald Trump won, and he's the great, Hillary's the great unifier, and Trump is, I think, has Michigan's in play. I think he can win this if he's disciplined and has a consistent message. And I actually think that the convention in Cleveland, we did very well.
Well, you make a good point, because maybe it's because it beat expectations. We were told going in that even reporters should take situational awareness classes and know how to get out of the way of trouble if it developed. And I've been around this for a long time. I've never seen that kind of security. They had us in those big high fences as they drove us from the media area in. But the reality is, all of those concerns about all of those things that might happen.
Microaggressions.
Yeah, it just didn't happen.
It did not happen. Actually, it was pretty smooth sailing. There a little bit of, a dust up about, Ted Cruz not endorsing. But, the fact is that it was a Donald Trump convention, and people want change. And this is a campaign about change. It's a campaign about paychecks and jobs, because people don't want 4 more years of the Obama-Clinton administration. And frankly, the veracity and the failure to tell the truth by Hillary Clinton, I think, moves people our way.
When you talk about the convention, if you go back and look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls, it is very clear that coming out of that convention there was separation, and Donald Trump got a bit of a convention bounce.
He got a bump, yeah.
And people talk about Hillary Clinton. Well, she had the advantage of being after the fact, and again, my words, not yours, Donald Trump had 2 pretty rough weeks coming out of the Democratic convention and going through some things where the scrutiny got pretty heavy, and so you started to see this separation. These numbers change all the time, so I don't pretend to say what they are going to be on a Sunday morning as we tape this a bit in advance. But this race as it is today is still one that's got 9.5 so weeks to go, and there's a lot that can change. As somebody who's observed a lot of these, you said discipline. What else does Donald Trump need to do?
Well, you know, it's about 70 days till Election Day, and in the back of everybody's mind is change. We've had 8 years of an economy where of the lowest job rate, increasing paychecks, the lowest job rate since 1949. That should not be what the normal is about. And I think people are fearful about what the economy will look like in the future. So it's about change and it's about paychecks. And I think it's all about being on message. And what people are concerned about are jobs, paychecks, change. We need to make the issue Hillary Clinton because of, you know, sometimes the liberal elite and sometimes the national media, not talking about Grand Rapids, but the national media and liberal elite have already determined this election because they think they're smarter than the rest of us. And the fact is they short circuit, to coin a phrase, and conveniently forget about Benghazi, emails, and almost an indictment. And I don't think the American people have forgotten about that, and I don't think they'll ignore it. And that's why I think we've seen Donald Trump coming into Michigan twice since the convention. Pence has come in, and I think we'll see more of them, Trump and Pence, coming into Michigan because Michigan's in play. It's one of those handful of states that can make or break the election in November.
Michigan's a little different because the down ballot races consist primarily of the state house races. There are no U.S. Senate races as there are in some real major swing states, right?
Well, we got the majority in the state house in Republican hands, and I'm going to work very hard to make sure we keep that. We've got 2 congressional races, one in the UP, one in southern Michigan, that Republican candidates will win there. And then we have a rule of law justices on the Michigan Supreme Court. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of need for robust activism. So we have a strong Republican year, and I want to help be a part of that.
Democrats do well in Michigan, generally speaking, in presidential election years, but the candidate at the top of the ticket needs to overperform 10 points or so in order to start making difference further down. Do you think that that's something you can stave against? I know you want Donald Trump to win in Michigan.
Well, it's something like that. You know, I think the point is we've had 8 years of the Obama administration. People want change, and that's why, even though Michigan historically, from time to time, as the Democrat contenders have done better in the state of Michigan, but I think in this instance, with the failures of Hillary Clinton, people don't trust her, and the fact they want change, I think we have a great opportunity for us, and that's why I'm very upbeat about what our chances are in November. But you have to work very hard. You can take nothing for granted, and our candidate needs to stay on message. And we've had a couple of good weeks, and that made up for some of the rocky weeks. But there's always drama in a campaign. It always happens. And you watch in the next 70 days, there could be other world events that captures people's attention. The Olympics are over, and now people are getting into serious, okay, it's time to make a decision on who do we want as president. And if you follow Supreme Court justice nominees, with Donald Trump, you'll get nominees for federal judges and the United States Supreme Court that have a conservative philosophy, more like Antonin Scalia, instead of the liberal philosophy of Clinton, Obama, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's a big issue for people.
When you look at these 2 candidates, and you've referenced a number of times that you don't think that Hillary Clinton can be believed, and her unfavorable numbers are above 50%. However, Donald Trump's unfavorable numbers remain higher than hers in most polls, and we have 2 major party candidates who more than 50% of the people don't like or don't trust on some level. That must be a bit of a different scenario.
Well, it is. They are definitely polarizing candidates. There's no doubt about that. And what I think that Trump does is he's very authentic about some of the fears that people have. Now, I don't think we should be bellicose or rude or anything like that, and I'm very clear on that. But the fact is that Donald Trump has tapped into some concerns about what's the economy going to be like, what are our paychecks going to be like, how do we provide for our family. We're like kids have the same opportunities we know in this land called America, and I think that will drive people our way. I think that there's not much. Hillary can't go much higher. I think that Trump has an opportunity to catch up and eke out a win.
What does the establishment need to do? And by that I mean, and I pointed this out with Chairman Romney when she was on the show, it was a little unusual to be at a convention where the 2 past Republican presidents were not there, where the 2 past nominees, Republicans for president, were not there.
Right.
The host governor of the state while he was there, he wasn't at the convention. He was certainly around Cleveland.
You mean Kasich?
Yeah, I mean Kasich, who you served with. You served,
Kasich and I are good friends.
yeah, you served during your time in Congress. How important is it for them, any of them, particularly Kasich in Ohio, to at least tacitly get on board? I mean, Ohio's another one of those have-to-win states, isn't it?
You bet. Ohio's a big state. So's Florida. So's Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Mexico. You know, you go across Florida. You go across the country. You know, I'm hopeful. I'm Michigan's optimist. Maybe I'm America's optimist that some of these former presidential candidates, in the end, will come forward and state their preference for Donald Trump. And I would also hope that others in the Republican Party leadership, the choice is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And if you want conservative judges named to federal posts and nominees to the United States Supreme Court, there's a reason to vote for Donald Trump. And I would hope they would make that decision. And frankly, no more whining. We need to, this is about winning. I want to win. I want to win it all in Michigan. I want high expectations, big aspirations. That means we need to win the presidential race so that we win our majority, keep our majority in the Republican House of Representatives, our rule of law justices on the Supreme Court, and our congressional races. So there's a reason to reach higher. There's a reason to work very hard. And I think all of us need to work hard and be all in for a strong Republican victory in November.
Hillary Clinton wins, Donald Trump wins. The Republican Party, it appears to me, has been fundamentally changed, no matter what the outcome of this race
I think that's
is.
probably true.
And what does that mean going forward? I know it's only a guess because we're just right in the midst of it, but I mean, it has changed. There are different ways, different directions that people have gone, different people that have come into the party, maybe some people that have gone out of the party. I mean, what does the Republican Party look like 2 years down the road?
Well, now that question I'm not sure, but I think it has fundamentally changed the party. I think the most important thing is that we have to practice addition. I did very well at addition at Carpenter Street Elementary School in Midland, Michigan. I didn't do that well in subtraction. So the fact is we need to build out the party, and we need to have a tent that is a big tent. And I think we need to, in 17 and 18, we'll look around when the dust settles, see what happens. I hope we have a strong Republican wins across the country, and particularly here in Michigan, and then we go forward. And you can't look back, you got to look forward. And I think the one thing everyone needs to talk about, people need to speak their mind. People need to make sure we're being direct instead of vagueness and nuances and all that nonsense. People want straight stuff, and I think that's a key message to Republicans.
Well, part of the straight stuff that you talk about has been Donald Trump, and some of the things that he said has not necessarily expanded the tent, but it may have alienated some folks from getting into that tent.
And that's a fair point. And so when you're authentic and you do straight talk, straight stuff, you also need to make sure you're respectful of people. And we can have differing viewpoints. You can have civil discourse and discussion. I think that it ought to be, our positions need to be based on persuasion, not the shrillness of your voice or how loud you can yell or what have you. It's all about being measured. It's about being aggressive and speaking your mind, but be respectful of different views. That's what America's about, and I think we need to reach back to those values as you go forward and having a big tent.
Most elected officials, most politicians, and every reporter I know will tell you that this is the most important election of our lifetime, just like we did 4 years ago and 4 years ago and 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
However,
yeah.
There is a lot on the line, and both historically, precedent-setting, first female nominee from a major party.
First time an outsider,
a real outsider,
coming out of nowhere.
So, how big a deal is this election?
Well, it's a big election. It's a big deal, particularly on 2 points. One, I talked about the nominations to the United States Supreme Court. And then, President Obama and Hillary Clinton, they're trying to Europeanize our American economy. So it looks more like Europe and less like America, with more rules anticipated if Hillary Clinton wins, more taxes to crush growth, and have a larger and larger government. That's the Democratic model of what they want to see in the future. And I think that would be devastating for the country on all those points. I want to have an economy that's based on free enterprise, entrepreneurship, free markets, and it can't be more rules, more regulations, and more taxes. I think we need to have a Michigan in America where you get to keep more of what you earn, and the government takes less of what you make. I think that's basic to where we go in the future.
We're back with more To the Point in just a moment. It is the Labor Day holiday weekend, and that is the unofficial beginning of the sprint to the end, to Election Day, Decision 2016. Between now and then, there will be much to talk about, many changes, and what about those polls that appear to be growing ever closer? But are they growing closer in those all-important battleground states? We'll be talking about that in the week to come. And next Sunday morning, I hope you'll join us at 10 o'clock right here on Wood TV 8 for To The Point.